Walter Grady stood at the edge of the cracked gravel driveway, staring out at the sprawling, sun-bleached property that now belonged to him. The ranch was a shadow of whatever life it had once known: rusted fences, a leaning mailbox with no name, and a house so weathered it seemed held together by stubbornness alone. The Texas sun beat down on his shoulders, its heat soaking through the cotton of his shirt. But Walter didn't move. He didn't need comfort. He needed silence, and this land offered it in abundance. The wind stirred dust across the parched ground, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and distant mesquite. Somewhere in the distance, a windmill creaked like an old man's knees. Walter took a slow breath and stepped forward, the crunch of gravel under his boots sounding louder than it should have in the stillness. He hadn't planned on starting over at 71, but after burying his wife 2 years earlier and retiring from 3.5 decades at the Pittsburgh steel mill, there was nothing left for him there. He didn't belong to the city anymore. Maybe he never had. He walked past the front porch, noting the missing planks and warped screen door, then paused at the edge of the property's old stable. The wood was greyed, the roof half collapsed, and a heavy padlock hung crooked on the latch, as if someone once tried to keep something in or out. He narrowed his eyes. The air around the stable was oddly cooler, stiller. As if even the wind was cautious here. The realtor had said the place hadn't been touched in nearly a decade. Bought cheap for a reason, she told him. No power, no livestock, no upkeep. Just land and a lot of work. That suited Walter fine. He wasn't looking for neighbors. He wanted the kind of quiet that let a man hear his own regrets. But even in silence, some things whisper. That night, as the sun dipped below the hill and the crickets took over the soundtrack of the land, Walter sat on the sagging porch with a tin cup of coffee gone cold. The stars over Texas were different than Pennsylvania. Bigger, bolder, like they had something to prove. He leaned back in the chair and let his thoughts wander, but a sharp clatter yanked him upright. It came from the stable. Wood on wood, like a knock from inside. He stood slowly, listening. Another thud. He walked down the dirt path toward the building, the flashlight in his hand, trembling just slightly. It wasn't fear. It was age. That's what he told himself. But when he reached the stable door and found it shut, though he hadn't touched it all day, something twisted in his gut. He pressed his hand to the rough wood. Warm. Odd, considering the night had cooled quickly. A breath. Not his. Walter took a step back, heart thumping now, and turned his light toward the gaps in the wood. Nothing. Just darkness and dust. Probably a raccoon, he muttered, but the words felt too thin in the air. The clatter came again, softer now. A scrape. Then silence. He didn't open the door that night. Instead, he backed away slow and steady until the porch light of the house was a safe beacon again. But something in him knew this wasn't a raccoon. It was something else. Don't forget to subscribe if you're drawn in by this mystery. The next part reveals the first steps into the unknown, and what Walter discovers will change everything. Morning brought no answers. Only a dry wind and the low groan of the stable walls shifting in the heat. Walter stood at the edge of the path once more, boots planted firmly in the dirt. He'd barely slept. The sound from the night before wasn't just an animal. He felt that deep in his bones. Something was inside that stable, something that didn't want to be found, or perhaps desperately did. He approached slowly, the padlock still dangling but unlatched. That alone made his stomach tighten. He hadn't touched it. With a firm grip on the rusted latch, he pulled the door open. The wood groaned loudly, echoing into the shadowed interior. The air inside was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of rot, hay, and something metallic. Blood. His eyes adjusted slowly. At first it seemed empty. Piles of mouldy feed bags slumped against the far wall, cobwebs stretched between ceiling beams, and broken tack hung like forgotten skeletons. But then he saw it. Movement, subtle, behind a heap of straw and old tarps. Walter stepped inside, heart pounding, and reached out to push the cover aside. There, curled in on itself, was a horse. Its coat was dusty brown, mottled with scars, and so thin he could count its ribs without trying. One eye was crusted shut, the other dull but alert. A rope was still loosely looped around its neck, frayed from time, but unmistakably a remnant of cruelty. Walter felt a rush of disbelief. The creature looked barely alive. "Jesus," he whispered. The horse didn't move. Walter knelt slowly, careful not to spook it. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He didn't know the first thing about animals, especially not horses, but something about the way the animal lay there, so silent, so resigned, made his chest tighten. It hadn't made a sound now. Maybe it couldn't anymore. He reached out a tentative hand, palm up. The horse flinched. Not far, but enough. Its muscles tensed and Walter drew back. "All right," he said gently. "No rush." He stood and looked around. There was no water in the trough, no sign of food. Only old equipment and decay. How long had it been here? How had it survived? Back at the house, he filled a bucket with water from the kitchen tap and returned to the stable. The horse watched him this time, tracking his movement. Walter set the bucket down slowly, sliding it across the floor. The horse didn't touch it, not yet. "I don't know what happened to you," Walter muttered, "but you're not dying in here, not while I'm around." It was the first promise he'd made out loud in years. As the sun climbed higher, he cleared out the corner nearest the horse, pulling away the worst of the debris. The place was a wreck, but there was enough shade to keep the animal from baking in the heat. He tossed some of the moldy hay aside, hoping to find something salvageable. That afternoon the horse drank. Just a few mouthfuls, cautious and slow. But it was something. Walter sat nearby, watching, thinking. He couldn't call animal control. They'd take the horse away, and judging by the shape it was in, probably put it down. That wasn't happening. Not yet. He opened an old toolbox in the barn and found a pair of wire cutters, a hammer, and some nails. He had no plan, but he had hands and time. That would have to do. As the light began to fade again, he stood at the stable door and looked back. The horse had curled up again, eyes half shut, body still trembling slightly. Walter didn't know if it trusted him, but maybe, just maybe, it hadn't given up yet. Neither had he. Tomorrow he'd go into town. He needed help, and he needed answers. The wind rose again as he closed the door behind him, but this time it felt less like warning, and more like a breath held, waiting. The drive into Blanco took just under 20 minutes. The road wound through open pasture and stretches of prickly pear cactus, past old windmills and rusty pickup trucks resting in front yards like retired soldiers. Walter hadn't been into town since he bought the ranch. He hadn't planned on needing anyone, but the horse changed that. He parked his truck near the square, in front of a diner called Martha Joe's. The sign swung lightly in the breeze, paint faded, but the smell of bacon and fresh coffee drifted out onto the sidewalk like an open invitation. He stepped inside. The place was small, warm, worn in like a good pair of boots. Locals filled the booths, farmers, ranchers, retirees. Conversations dropped a note in volume when Walter walked in. Strangers stuck out in Blanco. He nodded a silent greeting and made his way to the counter. A woman with sharp blue eyes and a thick grey braid behind her neck stood behind it. She looked him up and down. "You're the one bought the old Teague place," she said, not asking. "I am," Walter replied. "Walter Grady." She poured him coffee without being asked. "Martha Joe. That ranch has been empty near 10 years. Folks said it was cursed." She smiled faintly, not like she believed it, but like the idea had kept people from nosing around. "Not cursed, just broken." Walter sipped. The coffee was strong. Like most things worth fixing. That earned a raised eyebrow. "You here for eggs or information?" He hesitated. "Both, I guess. I found a Mustang on the property, in the stable. Looks like it's been there a long time. Malnourished, still breathing, though." Martha Joe's hands paused in their movement. "Alive, you're sure?" "I gave it water, it drank, seems like it's holding on." A boy at the far end of the counter perked up. 16, maybe 17. Tall, sunburnt skin, wiry. He slid off his stool and approached. "Where on the ranch?" he asked. "Far stall in the west stable." That's where the last one was kept, the boy said quietly, before everything went to hell. Walter frowned. The last one? Martha Jo cut in. This is Caleb. He works part-time for the Brysons, helps with their horses. Knows more about animals than most grown men. Caleb nodded. If it's hurt, it's going to need more than water. Might be infected. Could be scared out of its mind. You got gear? No, Walter admitted. Caleb glanced at Martha Jo, then back at Walter. I could come out, take a look. I'd appreciate it, Walter said. You'd be doing me a favor. I ain't doing it for you, Caleb said, not unkindly. I'm doing it for the horse. Walter nodded. Fair enough. Martha Jo leaned on the counter. Most folks wouldn't bother. Lot of men around here would have just called the sheriff or put the animal down. But you came looking for help. Walter stared into his coffee. I spent most of my life building things for other people. Never learned how to take care of something that couldn't talk back. Well, she said, pouring him a second cup, you just did. That afternoon, Walter drove back with Caleb riding shotgun. The boy didn't talk much, but he asked the right questions. What the horse looked like, how it moved, whether it had eaten anything. Walter answered as best he could, embarrassed by how little he knew. As they turned off the main road toward the ranch, Caleb pointed toward the distant silhouette of the barn. You got lucky, he said. If it's still standing, and the horse is still alive, maybe something in that place wants a second chance. Walter didn't answer, but he was starting to wonder the same thing. Tomorrow they'd see what that second chance looked like. Dust clung to the morning air as Caleb stepped into the stable with practiced calm. He crouched low beside the Mustang, scanning its frame with narrow eyes. Walter stood back, arms crossed, uncertain. She's dehydrated, Caleb said, and underfed. Might have an infection in that eye, but she's got fight left. She? Walter asked. Yep, definitely a mare. You didn't even check? Walter shook his head. Didn't seem right to get that close. Caleb gave him a sidelong glance. That's not a bad instinct. They worked quietly through the morning. Caleb guided Walter through mixing a proper feed mash, sweet grain softened in water, while he cleaned the mare's eye with a gentle saline rinse. The animal flinched but didn't bolt. She was tired. Broken, maybe. But not gone. What's her name? Caleb asked. Walter hesitated. She didn't come with one. Well, you gotta call her something. Walter looked at the patchy coat, the faded red-brown streaked with gray and dirt. Dusty, he said. Looks like she was born of this land. Caleb smiled faintly. Dusty works. They moved through the rest of the stable, clearing out rot and rust. Walter's back ached, hands blistered from work he hadn't done in decades. But there was something satisfying about it. Each board he hauled, each piece of wire he coiled and tossed, made the place feel less like a grave and more like a beginning. Later that evening, alone again, Walter stood beside Dusty's stall, watching her doze. He thought of Emily, his wife, and the way she used to talk about her childhood on a horse farm in Kentucky. She'd wanted to move south when he retired, get back to wide skies and good dirt. He'd told her they were too old for that. Now, standing there, he felt the weight of that refusal like a stone. He had wasted time. She would have loved Dusty, would have known what to do. He pulled a photo from his wallet, faded, creased at the corners. Emily, smiling in the sun, hair tied back in a red bandana, standing beside a palomino she used to ride as a girl. He remembered how her face lit up whenever she talked about those years. He'd smiled, listened, but never joined her in that world. I should have done this sooner, he whispered, voice catching. The wind shifted. Dusty stirred. He stepped into the stall slowly, holding out a flat hand with a few softened oats. She sniffed once, then nudged his palm. Walter froze. The touch was light, warm, real. It caught him off guard. You're tougher than you look, he murmured. Guess we both are. The old ranch creaked and moaned in the night air. Somewhere beyond the fields, a coyote called out. But here in the stall it was quiet, honest, alive. Walter didn't sleep much that night. His body was sore in places he'd forgotten could hurt, but his mind was sharper than it had been in years. He lay awake thinking about what Dusty had been through, how long she'd waited in that broken stable, how close she'd come to giving up, and about how close he had too. By dawn, he knew this wasn't a rescue story. Not just hers. Maybe not at all. This was something else, something deeper. He stepped outside, boots crunching on the cool ground, and looked toward the fields behind the stable. There was no sign of who left her or why. But he knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Tomorrow they'd keep going. Fix what could be fixed. Learn what needed learning. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days began to fall into rhythm. Mornings started early, just after sunrise, with Caleb arriving in his beat-up truck, carrying a backpack of supplies and the same no-nonsense attitude. Walter had started to anticipate the sound of gravel crunching under Caleb's tires. It gave him a sense of structure he hadn't known he missed. Dusty improved slowly. She ate more, her eyes cleared, and she no longer shrank at every movement. But one thing hadn't changed. She still froze whenever Walter entered the stall wearing his old leather belt. Caleb noticed it first. "Stop right there," he said one morning as Walter stepped into the stable. Walter paused mid-step. "What is it?" Caleb pointed. "Your belt." Walter looked down. Brown leather cracked from years of wear, the kind of belt that lasted decades. He frowned. "What about it?" "She reacts every time you wear it. Tenses up. Watch." He walked to the far side of the stall, calm and slow. Dusty remained relaxed. Walter stepped in again, her ears flattened, legs stiffened. "You think it's the belt?" Walter asked. "Smell. Texture. Something about it. Maybe whoever had her before wore one like that." Caleb studied Dusty's posture. "Horses remember, sometimes better than we do." Walter pulled the belt off and tossed it aside. "What do I wear then? Rope?" Caleb smirked. "I'll bring you something better tomorrow." The next day, he handed Walter a simple belt he'd made from woven cotton rope. No buckle, soft, secure. "Try this." No leather, no metal. Walter looped it through his jeans and entered the stall. Dusty didn't flinch. Her muscles stayed loose, eyes calm. "I'll be damned," Walter muttered. Caleb leaned against the stall gate. "Told you. You gotta learn to listen to them even when they're silent." That line stuck with Walter for the rest of the day. He thought back on the years he'd spent working in the steel mill. Everything was loud. Machines roared, metal screamed. You didn't listen to subtle things there. You didn't stop to think about fear or memory. You worked. You shut off the rest. Maybe that's why it had taken him so long to hear anything again. That afternoon, Walter sat in the grass outside the stable, watching Dusty graze. She was still thin, but stronger. Her steps had a rhythm now. Her ears twitched at every sound, every bird call and rustling leaf. He realized how much he'd missed in his own life, how many things Emily had tried to show him, how often he'd answered her with silence. He glanced at the belt Caleb made. A small thing, but sometimes it's the smallest things that mark the biggest shift. That night, Walter pulled out Emily's old tapes. Recordings from their early marriage. He hadn't listened to them in years. Her voice, soft and full of laughter, filled the quiet house. He sat by the window, Dusty visible in the moonlight beyond the yard, and let the sound wash over him. "I wish you'd come out here with me," her voice said on one tape. "It's beautiful, peaceful. There's something about being close to a horse that makes you remember you're part of something bigger. You can't fake it with them. They see right through you." Walter closed his eyes. He wasn't sure if Dusty saw through him yet. But she was watching, and he was trying. The wind rolled in soft from the west, carrying the scent of grass and pine. Dusty lifted her head briefly, ears twitching toward the house, then lowered it again. Tomorrow they'd clean the back stalls. He'd fix the gate that kept swinging loose. Caleb was bringing more feed, but tonight he just listened, to the wind, to the silence, and to everything that had been left unsaid. The Texas sun was relentless, beating down on the back of Walter's neck as he hammered a new board into the stable wall. Sweat rolled down his temples, soaked the collar of his shirt, and blurred the lines of his vision, but he didn't stop. Each nail he drove in echoed like punctuation in the story he was writing with his hands. This place had been abandoned for too long. It had suffered, just like the horse, just like him. Caleb had shown him how to brace the beams and check for rot. The kid wasn't just good with horses. He understood structures too. Said he learned it from his uncle, who did contracting work on weekends. Walter found himself listening more than talking, something he hadn't done enough of in his earlier years. They worked mostly in silence, only the rhythmic sound of tools and the occasional grunt when something didn't fit right. Dusty watched from the paddock, her eyes tracking every movement like she still didn't quite believe it. Walter could relate. Later that day, while clearing out an old storage cabinet inside the stable's side room, Walter stumbled across something unexpected. Behind a stack of rusted tools and a collapsed saddle rack, his fingers brushed against a metal box, green, dented and caked with dust. He dragged it out and popped it open. Inside, wrapped in a dry, flaking cloth, was a small, leather-bound journal. He flipped it open. The handwriting was rough, uneven, written in long paragraphs that ran together. The ink had faded in places, but some lines were still legible. March 9th. The boy don't speak much no more. Just rides that horse and stares off like he's waiting for something that ain't coming back. Walter paused, heart tight. He turned the page. April 4th. The mare spooked again, ran herself into the post and near broke her leg. He cried this time. I didn't know what to say. I ain't good with words. The entries were short, scattered, and deeply personal. Some pages were torn out, others smeared with what looked like rain damage. But the voice behind them was unmistakable, tired, troubled, trying. Walter sat on the stool by the wall and kept reading. May 17th. Thought maybe the land would fix us. Maybe being out here would remind me how to raise a kid. But the ghosts don't stay in the city. They follow you in silence. He closed the journal slowly, a weight forming in his chest. Someone had lived here. Someone had tried to rebuild, just like him, and something had broken them before they could. When Caleb returned from town with supplies, Walter handed him the journal. Found this in the back room. Caleb opened it and read a few lines. His brow furrowed. Sounds like a vet. Walter nodded. Yeah, and the boy mentioned might have been his grandson. They stood in silence for a moment. You think that horse is hers? From back then? Caleb asked. Walter looked toward Dusty, now grazing by the fence. I don't know, but something about her, it lines up. He didn't say what he was really thinking, that this wasn't just coincidence. That the ranch hadn't been empty. It had been holding on to something, waiting. That night, Walter laid the journal on the kitchen table and sat with it like it was a letter from the past. A man had tried to heal his family here. Maybe failed, but maybe not completely. The house creaked in the evening breeze. Outside, Dusty shifted in her stall, quiet and alive. Walter didn't believe in signs, but he believed in echoes, and this place was starting to speak. He just had to keep listening. The following morning brought a rare, cool breeze, the kind that hinted at autumn, even as the sun tried to remind everyone it was still Texas. Walter stepped into the stable with a strange sense of purpose. He'd left the journal on the kitchen table, but it hadn't left his mind. The words inside lingered like ghosts, turning the ranch into something more than wood and dirt. As he swept the far side of the stall, trying to clear years of grime and hay packed tight like old memories, his broom knocked against something hard beneath the floorboards. Not stone, not wood, a different sound. He crouched, ran his hand along the ground and found a loose board, barely held by two rusted nails. With care he pried it up. Underneath, wrapped in faded oilcloth, was a stack of envelopes, bound together with a dry, brittle piece of twine. He carried them outside into the light, brushing off layers of dust. There were maybe 20 in total, each addressed in the same careful hand. To Henry McCall. No return address, no stamps. He sat under the edge of the porch roof and opened the first one. Grandpa, I know you don't believe in talking much. That's fine. But I need to write. I need to say things, even if you never read them. Walter read slowly. Each letter unfolded the life of a teenage boy named Eli. who had come to live with his grandfather after his parents died in a car accident. The ranch had been a last resort for both of them, a place to survive, not to thrive. The tone of the letters ranged from hopeful to bitter to quiet acceptance. They were never mailed, just written and hidden. I miss them every day. I know you do too, but you act like you don't. Dusty helps. She listens better than either of us. Dusty. Walter blinked, reading the name again. He opened another. She's scared of thunder. I stay in the stall with her during storms. I think she's the only reason I haven't completely lost it. He closed his eyes for a moment, holding the paper as if it was still warm from the boy's hands. Dusty hadn't just been a horse, she had been his anchor. The next letter was shorter. She got out. The gate was loose. I found her near the creek. You yelled, but I think you were more scared than mad. Then one more. I know I can't fix you, but I still hope one day you'll look at me and not see everything you lost. Walter read every letter, each one deepening the weight in his chest. These weren't just messages. They were confessions, pieces of a boy trying to understand his place in a world that had shattered around him. And somewhere along the way, Dusty had become his lifeline. When Caleb arrived that afternoon, Walter handed him one of the letters. Caleb read silently, mouth tight, eyes narrowing. So she is his horse, he said quietly. Seems that way. Caleb looked out toward the field where Dusty stood under the shade of an oak. That's why she was still here, why she stayed. Maybe she was waiting for him to come back. Walter nodded, his voice dry. But he didn't. They didn't speak for a while. Eventually, Caleb said, "What do we do with all this?" Walter looked toward the stable. "We keep going. We take care of her." That's what he'd have done if he'd had the chance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Walter carefully rewrapped the letters and placed them in a clean wooden box. He set it on the mantel in the house, beside Emily's photo and the journal. Not forgotten. The wind picked up again, just enough to rustle the trees, and somewhere inside, something that had been holding its breath began to exhale. The Saturday morning air buzzed with quiet energy. Walter stood by the front gate, gripping a thermos of coffee, watching the dust trail of approaching trucks and cars as they wound down the gravel drive. What had started as a passing comment to Martha Jo, "Maybe I should open the place up, let folks see the horse," had turned into a full-fledged gathering. He didn't know what to expect. But the moment he saw the first family stepping out of a red Ford, with 2 kids holding folding chairs and a casserole dish, he knew it was bigger than he'd imagined. Martha Jo had done most of the organizing. "You can't just hide out here forever," she'd told him. "Let people in. You'll be surprised what comes out of it." Now she stood by the stable entrance, apron on, ladling chili from a slow cooker like she was hosting a church picnic. Caleb was already in the paddock with Dusty, brushing her coat and tying back the lead rope so folks could get a look without crowding her. The horse handled it better than Walter had expected, ears alert, eyes calm. She didn't panic, didn't pull away. Just watched the people with quiet curiosity. Kids stared wide-eyed. Adults stood back, respectful but engaged. One older man stepped forward and said, "Didn't think she'd still be alive. Thought they took the last of 'em years ago." Walter asked what he meant, but the man just shook his head. Long story. By noon, more than 20 people had gathered. Conversations bloomed in the yard. Lawn chairs formed clusters under the trees. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought peach cobbler. Walter hadn't known he needed any of it until he was in the middle of it. He sat with Martha Jo under the shade of the porch. "Didn't think anyone'd come," he admitted. "You fed 'em, they'll always come for food," she said with a grin. "But it's more than that. You gave them something to believe in again. A story that didn't end in ruin." Walter glanced toward Dusty, who now stood with a little girl beside her, hand resting gently on the horse's neck. "Maybe," he said. Then came the crack. Loud, sharp, not a gunshot. Wood snapping. Caleb turned, eyes wide. "The barn roof!" he shouted. People scattered as a section of the old stable, weakened by years of weather and last night's rain, gave way and crashed inward. Dust rose in a thick cloud, and silence followed. Sharp and sudden. No one was hurt. But the side stall, one of the few Walter hadn't gotten to yet, was crushed. He stared at it frozen. Martha Jo touched his shoulder. "It's not the end." Walter didn't answer. The crowd lingered awkwardly. Someone started gathering chairs. Others offered help. Caleb approached, face tense. "I told you that section needed bracing," he said gently. "I didn't think it would go today." "It's not your fault." Walter shook his head. "I should have done more." Caleb looked around at the people still waiting nearby. "You still can. They're not leaving because the roof caved in. They're staying because they believe in what you started." Walter looked again. He saw hands collecting splintered wood, saw a rancher from 2 plots over offering to bring his tractor, saw teenagers stacking bricks without being asked. He saw a community, not watching him fail but helping him rebuild. As the sun dipped low, Walter stood beside the ruins of the stall. Dusty nudged his shoulder gently as if to say, "Still here." He whispered, "Yeah, me too." He didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't worry keeping him awake. It was momentum. He realized something had shifted, not just on the ranch, but in him. Tomorrow, he'd start early. And this time, he wouldn't be doing it alone. The week after the collapse passed in a flurry of nails, sweat, and borrowed tools. Walter rose before dawn, often finding Caleb already hauling lumber out of the truck bed, sleeves rolled, quiet and focused. Others came too. Neighbors who'd barely nodded at him before now showed up with work gloves and thermoses, no explanations needed. The barn wall was rebuilt sturdier than before. They reinforced the roof with fresh beams. Walter felt it in his bones, every hammer swing a reminder that age didn't mean uselessness. Dusty had stayed calm through it all, not untouched. She still hesitated near the sound of hammers, but her trust held. She followed Caleb more willingly now, even nudging his shoulder on occasion. When Walter walked beside her, she leaned in slightly. Not enough to crowd him, but enough to say, "I see you." One morning, Walter found Caleb waiting by the paddock with a long lead rope in hand and a glint in his eye. "She's ready," he said. Walter looked from the rope to the mare. "Ready for what?" "First real walk, outside the paddock, just down the fence line and back." Walter hesitated. "You think she's strong enough?" "She's more than strong enough. The question is, are you?" Walter laughed softly. "Guess we'll find out." They opened the paddock gate, and Caleb clipped the rope to Dusty's halter. She stepped forward slowly, cautious but not fearful. Walter walked on her other side, not holding anything, just keeping pace. The three moved together along the edge of the pasture, past the new posts and fresh wire. The grass was greener here, kissed by the last rain, dotted with purple wildflowers. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning dew. Dusty stopped once, ears twitching. A bird took off from the fence post and she flinched just slightly, then relaxed. "You see that?" Caleb said. She didn't bolt. "That's progress." Walter nodded. She used to freeze at shadows. They reached the far fence and turned around. Dusty picked up her pace slightly, walking with more confidence. Walter caught himself smiling. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd care about any of this. I came out here thinking I'd just sit and wait for the end." Caleb looked over. "So you're not the only one." They were halfway back when a white SUV rolled up the drive, tires crunching the gravel. A tall woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. She wore a navy blue windbreaker with the county seal embroidered on the chest. "Walter Grady," she called out. He exchanged a glance with Caleb, then walked over, Dusty still at his side. "I'm Walter. Angela Price, County Agriculture and Livestock Oversight. We received an anonymous report about an unregistered Mustang being kept on the property." Walter's gut tightened. "She was abandoned. I've been caring for her." "She's not tagged. That's a problem. Wild horses are federally protected. Without paperwork, this animal's technically government property." Walter stepped forward. "She's not wild anymore. She's been here suffering. I didn't steal her, I saved her." Angela didn't flinch. "I don't doubt your intentions, but this needs to be resolved legally. I'll need to file a report, and we may need to transfer her for evaluation." "No," Caleb said quickly. You move her now, she'll shut down again. She barely trusts anyone. Angela looked from the horse to the boy, then to Walter. I'm not here to be the villain, but you've got 48 hours to file emergency custody paperwork and begin the permit process. If you do that, there's a chance she stays. She handed Walter a pamphlet. Don't wait. As the SUV pulled away, Walter's shoulders sank. Caleb held the papers. We can fix this. Walter looked at Dusty, who pressed gently against his arm. I'm not letting them take her. He meant it. And for the first time, he wasn't just reacting to life. He was choosing it. The forms spread across Walter's kitchen table like a map of a world he didn't understand. Legal language, registration numbers, fees. Caleb sat across from him with a pencil between his fingers, chewing on the eraser like it could produce answers. We've got the vet appointment scheduled, Caleb said. She'll need microchipping, blood work, and we got a file with the Bureau of Land Management for temporary custody. But it's doable. Walter rubbed his temples. It's a lot of steps. And it doesn't guarantee they'll let me keep her. No, Caleb admitted, but not doing it guarantees they won't. Walter looked out the window. Dusty stood under the old oak, tail swishing, posture relaxed. She didn't know her future was being negotiated. Before he could speak, tires crunched on the gravel again. Another visitor. This time it was a man in polished boots and a button-down shirt, too clean for real ranch work. He stepped out of a black SUV, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Grady, he called. Walter stepped outside, wary. Who's asking? Clay Garrison, Garrison Development Group. I'm in the area overseeing a project and heard about your property. Thought I'd stop by. Walter didn't shake his hand. Clay pressed on. We're planning a resort and golf course just over the ridge. We're buying up ranches that border the development. Yours is in a key location. We'd like to make you an offer. Walter blinked. I'm not selling. You haven't even heard the number. Don't need to. Clay smiled again, thinner now. It's a generous offer. More than most places around here are worth. You could retire comfortably anywhere. I already am retired. Clay glanced at the barn, the patched fencing, the fields half-grown with weeds. Doesn't look like it. Walter's jaw tightened. What I have here doesn't need your approval. Clay stepped back, adjusted his sunglasses. Just think about it. These small-town folks like to talk about community, but when the money starts flowing, they'll leave you behind. Walter said nothing. Clay left the offer in an envelope on the porch. After the SUV disappeared down the drive, Caleb picked up the envelope and tossed it on the table beside the custody forms. You thinking about it? He asked. Walter didn't answer right away. He sat down hard in the kitchen chair, staring at the envelope as if it might answer for him. It's a lot of money, Caleb said, quieter now. I know. You could move somewhere nice. Florida, Arizona. Live easy. Walter looked out at Dusty again. You ever hear your own voice when you're not speaking? He asked. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? Back when Emily was alive, we talked about land. About doing something like this. I always brushed it off, said we were too old, too late. But this place, this horse, it's the first time I've felt like I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. Caleb leaned forward. So you're staying? Walter didn't answer. He stood and walked to the living room, opened a drawer, pulled out an old cassette, one of Emily's tapes. He slid it into the player and hit play. Her voice filled the room, warm and unguarded. You don't need to find peace in the quiet, Walt. You need to find it in the work, in the things that grow from your hands. That's what land gives us. It keeps us human. Walter sat down slowly, head bowed. Outside, the wind swept through the grass. Dusty raised her head toward the window, ears forward, waiting. Walter closed his eyes, and in the stillness he knew the answer. The morning after the developer's visit, Walter found Caleb sitting on the tailgate of his truck, head bowed, kicking at the dirt with his boot. Something about his posture was different, less steady, less sure. Walter poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one over. You look like a man waiting on bad news, Walter said. Caleb smirked weakly. Already got it. My dad says I'm done with school. Wants me working full-time at the lumber yard. Says books don't put food on the table. Walter took a slow sip. And what do you say? I say he's wrong. I say I want more. But around here, wanting more don't count for much. Caleb's jaw clenched. He doesn't get it. The only place I feel like myself is out here. With the horses. With Dusty. Walter watched the boy's face, the stubborn line of his mouth, the fight between duty and desire. He saw himself at 16, silent, angry, trapped in choices that didn't feel like his own. You thinking about leaving? Walter asked. Caleb shrugged. Thought about it, but where would I go? I don't got money. Don't got family anywhere else. Silence hung between them, broken only by the creak of the windmill and Dusty's snort from the paddock. Walter set his cup down. You've got something worth more than money. You've got a direction. Most men spend their whole lives never finding that. Caleb looked over. And what if my dad don't let me follow it? Walter's voice was firm. Then you find another way. That evening, Walter called Martha Joe at the diner. When she picked up, he said, I need to ask a favor. By the next morning, word had spread. The diner had found a way to cover a few of Caleb's shifts in exchange for help at the ranch. It wasn't much, but it gave the boy an excuse, a way to say he was working without directly defying his father. When Caleb arrived, surprise flickered in his eyes. You did this? I just made a call, Walter said. You've been doing the rest for weeks. They got back to work, repairing a fence line, Dusty trailing behind like a shadow. Caleb stopped halfway through hammering and looked at Walter. Why are you helping me? Walter wiped the sweat from his forehead. Because someone should have done the same for me when I was your age. But they didn't, so I'm doing it now. Caleb's grip tightened on the hammer. His voice softened. Feels like this place is the only thing keeping me from disappearing. Walter studied him. It's keeping both of us, but it's not just the land, it's the work. It's the choice you make every day to stay standing. Dusty nudged Caleb's arm then, as if agreeing. The boy smiled for the first time that day, small but real. Later, when Caleb drove home, Walter lingered by the paddock, watching the tail lights fade into the dark. He thought about the boy's words, about the burden of expectation, about how close Caleb was to either breaking free or breaking entirely. He reached over the fence and rested a hand on Dusty's neck. Her coat was warmer now, fuller, no longer the fragile creature he'd first found. You're not the only one getting stronger, he whispered. The stars stretched wide overhead, and for the first time in years, Walter didn't feel like a man counting down his days. He felt like someone planting new ones. Tomorrow would bring more work, more decisions, but tonight there was hope. The late summer sun burned hotter than it had in weeks, turning the dirt beneath Walter's boots into powder. Caleb leaned against the paddock rail, arms folded, eyes fixed on Dusty. The mare stood calm, tail flicking, her coat brighter now, her frame filled with strength instead of weakness. I've been thinking, Caleb said. The Blanco County Rodeo's in 3 weeks. Nothing big, not the kind with bucking broncs or prize money. More like a fairground showcase. I want to take Dusty. Walter raised an eyebrow. You're serious. Dead serious. Not to ride her, not yet. Just to lead her in the ring. Show people what she's become. Walter studied the boy's face. The determination there reminded him of steel pressed under heat, bent, hammered, but never broken. She might not be ready for crowds. That's the point, Caleb said. Neither am I. But if we don't try, we'll never know. For 2 weeks, they prepared. Caleb walked Dusty through drills, pausing, pivoting, responding to the gentlest tug of the rope. Walter watched closely, offering advice where he could, but mostly learning as much as Dusty did. The mare startled at loud noises, especially when a neighbor's truck backfired, but each time Caleb calmed her, voice steady, patience unwavering. One evening, after hours of practice, Walter leaned on the fence while Dusty grazed. She trusts you more than me, he admitted. Caleb shook his head. She trusts both of us, just in different ways. The night of the rodeo, the fairground lights cast a golden glow over the dusty arena. The smell of popcorn and barbecue mixed with hay and diesel from the generators. Families filled the bleachers, kids with snow cones, parents fanning themselves with folded programs. Walter sat in the stands, heart pounding harder than he expected. Dusty entered the ring with Caleb at her side, the boy wearing his only clean button-down and boots polished enough to catch the light. The announcer's voice boomed. "Folks, this here's a special one. A Mustang rescued from the edge, brought back to health with patience and grit. Let's give a warm welcome to Dusty and her handler, young Caleb Myers." Applause rippled through the crowd. Dusty flinched at the noise but didn't bolt. Caleb stroked her neck, whispering, steadying her. Together they walked the perimeter of the ring, step by step, head high. Walter's throat tightened. He remembered the first time he'd seen her, skin and bone hidden in shadow. And now here she was, moving like she belonged under the lights. Halfway through, a balloon popped near the stands. The sharp crack cut the air. Dusty jolted, muscles coiling, eyes wide. The crowd tensed. Caleb held firm, voice calm. "Easy, girl, easy. It's all right. Just noise." "Nothing to hurt you." Walter gripped the edge of his seat, whispering under his breath, "Hold steady, come on, you can do this." Dusty snorted, stomped once, then stilled. Her ears flicked forward. She leaned into Caleb's touch, choosing trust over fear. The crowd erupted in cheers. Not polite applause, real thunderous cheering. Caleb led her the rest of the way around the ring, chin lifted, pride radiating off him like heat. When they exited, Walter rose to his feet without realizing it, clapping until his palms stung. Back outside, Caleb grinned ear to ear. "She did it." "You both did," Walter said, voice rough with emotion. Dusty nudged them both, as if claiming her part of the moment. That night, as they drove home under a wide Texas sky, Walter stared at the stars and felt something bloom in his chest. Not just pride, not just relief. It was the undeniable sense that this was only the beginning. The morning after the rodeo, Walter stood at the edge of the pasture with his hands on the fence rail, watching Dusty graze in the golden light. Pride still hummed in his chest, but it was mixed with something sharper, purpose. The crowd's reaction the night before hadn't been about entertainment. It was about hope. If one broken horse could come back, maybe people could too. Martha Joe's truck rattled up the drive, horn honking twice. She climbed out with her usual no-nonsense stride, a folder tucked under her arm. "You've got momentum, Walter, don't waste it," he frowned. Momentum. Half the county saw Dusty last night. Folks are still talking. You should build on that. Make this ranch into something more than a fixer-upper. Therapy space, riding lessons, a place for kids who need direction. Walter blinked. "You mean, open it up?" Martha Joe handed him the folder. Inside were pamphlets and grant applications she'd dug up. Call it whatever you want. Community stable, outreach program, sanctuary. People will support it. You've already proven it's possible. The idea lodged itself in Walter's mind and refused to leave. That afternoon he walked the property with Caleb, measuring out where additional stalls could be built, imagining an arena where children could work with gentle horses, where broken spirits could find what Dusty had found. "You think people would actually come here?" Walter asked. Caleb leaned on the fence post. "I know I would have. If something like this had been around when I was younger, maybe I wouldn't have felt so stuck." He looked Walter in the eye. "It matters." By evening, Walter was sketching layouts on the kitchen table, rough lines of barns and fencing beside the custody forms for Dusty. But reality hit soon enough. Plans needed approval. The ranch wasn't zoned for commercial use. Paperwork wasn't just about horses anymore. It was about county boards and regulations. 2 weeks later, he sat in a cramped meeting room at the Blanco zoning office, hat in his lap, papers neatly stacked in front of him. Across the table, 3 board members scanned the proposal with unreadable faces. One finally spoke. "Mr. Grady, this sounds ambitious. But your land's zoned agricultural, not for public use. Liability alone makes this tricky. You'd need inspections, insurance, safety certifications. That's a long process." Walter cleared his throat. "I'm not asking for shortcuts. I'm asking for a chance. This ranch sat empty for 10 years, falling apart. Now it's alive again. People came to see it. Kids smiled for the first time in a while. You think that's nothing? The board members exchanged glances. Another one said, "We'll review it. No promises." Walter left the office feeling deflated. Back at the diner, he slumped into a booth. Martha Jo slid a cup of coffee in front of him. "Well?" "They don't care," he muttered. "Paper and rules. That's all it is to them." Martha Jo crossed her arms. "Then we make them care." The next week, letters poured in. Parents wrote about how their kids had been inspired by Dusty at the rodeo. Veterans sent notes saying a sanctuary like that could change lives. Neighbors signed petitions. Martha Jo organized a town hall and people showed up, dozens of them, sharing their stories, their reasons why the ranch mattered. Walter sat in the back, overwhelmed. He hadn't asked for all this. He'd just wanted peace. But maybe peace was never meant to be solitary. Maybe it was meant to be shared. That night, as he locked up the stable, Dusty leaned against him, warm and solid. "You started this," Walter whispered. The mare flicked her ears, steady as ever, and Walter knew there was no turning back now. The attic smelled of dust and cedar, the kind of air that clung to clothes long after you left it. Walter climbed the narrow ladder one late afternoon, chasing a loose thought that had nagged him for days. He wanted to know more. About Henry McCall, about the boy in the letters, about Dusty's past. He pushed aside boxes of yellowed newspapers and cracked mason jars until his hand brushed against a flat wooden crate shoved into the far corner. Inside, wrapped in brittle paper, lay a bundle of photographs. Most were of the ranch in its better days, fences straight, grass tall, barns painted bright, but one picture stopped him cold. A boy, maybe 15, stood beside a young Mustang with the same dark eyes and familiar blaze down her face. The horse was unmistakable. Dusty. Walter sat back, staring at the photo. The boy's grin was wide, but his arm around the horse spoke louder than his smile. They belonged to each other. The next morning, Walter drove into town and tracked down an address written on the back of one of the photos. It led him to a small house at the edge of Blanco, its porch sagging but swept clean. An elderly woman answered the door, her hair silver, her eyes sharp despite the weight of years. "Mrs. McCall?" Walter asked gently. She studied him for a moment. "I am." "Can I help you?" He held out the photo. "I think this belongs to you." Her breath caught. She touched the picture with trembling fingers, tracing the boy's face. "Eli," she whispered. Walter nodded. "I found it in the attic of the ranch, along with letters. He wrote them to his grandfather." Her eyes filled. "He never mailed them. He kept everything inside." "Just like his grandpa." She shook her head, voice breaking. "After the accident, Eli couldn't. He was never the same. And when he passed—" She stopped, unable to continue. Walter cleared his throat softly. "The horse, Dusty. She's alive. She's been on the ranch all this time." Mrs. McCall froze, disbelief etched across her face. "Alive?" "Yes. Malnourished, scarred, but alive. We've been caring for her. She's strong again." The woman pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping free. "He loved that horse more than anything. I thought she was gone with him." Walter hesitated. "Would you like to see her?" At the stable later that day, Dusty lifted her head as Walter led Mrs. McCall toward the paddock. The old woman's steps were slow but steady. When she reached the fence, she extended a frail hand. Dusty sniffed, ears flicking, then leaned forward and pressed her muzzle against the woman's palm. Mrs. McCall closed her eyes, whispering through tears. "He never really left. Not all the way." Walter stood back, throat tight, watching the quiet exchange. Dusty, the boy, the letters. It all came together in that moment. The horse wasn't just a survivor. She was a keeper of memory, of love that refused to vanish. Mrs. McCall turned to him after a long silence. "Thank you. You gave me back a piece of my grandson." Walter shook his head. "Dusty did that. I just opened the door." As the evening settled in, he walked back to the house with the photograph still in his hand. He set it beside Emily's picture on the mantel, feeling a strange balance form in the room. Past and present, loss and renewal, standing side by side. Outside, Dusty grazed in the fading light, no longer just a horse on a forgotten ranch. She was the bridge between what had been lost and what was being rebuilt. Walter exhaled slowly, a weight lifting. He finally understood. This was never only about saving her. It was about saving himself. The morning sky stretched wide and golden, streaked with lavender clouds drifting lazily toward the horizon. Walter leaned against the fence rail, his coffee steaming in the crisp air, watching the ranch come alive. Children's laughter floated across the pasture, where a handful of local kids brushed ponies borrowed from neighboring ranches. Caleb supervised, steady and patient, while Martha Jo handed out biscuits from a tin she'd brought along. Dusty stood near the oak tree, her head lowered, eyes half closed in calm. She looked stronger now, her coat full and shining, a far cry from the fragile creature Walter had first found in the shadows. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Walter took it all in. The chatter, the footsteps, the smell of hay mixing with fresh bread. The ranch, once a hollow skeleton of what it had been, pulsed with life. He realized he'd spent years chasing silence, but peace wasn't silence at all. Peace was sound, honest, unpolished, alive. Martha Jo walked over, brushing crumbs from her apron. "Not bad for an old man's project," she teased. Walter chuckled. Didn't plan on it being more than a place to sit and wait. And now, he looked out across the field again. Caleb was laughing with one of the younger boys, showing him how to hold the brush without spooking the pony. Dusty flicked her tail, unbothered by the bustle around her. "Now," Walter said slowly, "I figure waiting's over. Living's the work I've got left." Martha Jo's smile softened. "That's the best answer I've heard in a long while." As the sun climbed higher, people began to head out, waving, promising to return next week. Caleb lingered, leaning on the fence beside Walter once the yard had quieted. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Caleb asked. Walter shook his head. "Never, but I think Emily would have liked it. She'd have been better at this than me." Caleb looked at him. "You're not too bad yourself." The words carried more weight than the boy probably realized. Walter nodded, his throat tightening, and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You're part of this too. Don't forget it." As afternoon settled, Walter led Dusty out to the open pasture. They walked side by side, no rope between them, just trust. At the fence line, Walter stopped and leaned on the post, watching her step into the tall grass. She moved with quiet confidence, head high, tail swishing in the breeze. Walter exhaled, long and steady. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. He didn't feel like a man waiting for his story to end. He felt like a man standing in the middle of it. "Home at last," he whispered. The land seemed to answer, the grass bending in the wind, the sky stretching wide and endless. Walter turned back toward the house, where the sound of Caleb's hammer already echoed faintly, another stall being built, another piece of the future taking shape. He knew there would be more work, more challenges, more battles with boards and papers and repairs. But he also knew he wouldn't be facing them alone, and that made all the difference. He paused once more, taking in the ranch, the laughter that still lingered in the air, the photo of Emily waiting inside on the mantel, the letters resting safe in their box, and Dusty grazing freely at last. Every piece of it was part of a story bigger than himself. He smiled, a quiet curve of the lips, steady and sure. "Yeah," he said softly. "Home at last." Don't forget to subscribe if this journey touched you. And if you're ready for more stories of resilience, hope, and second chances, click the video waiting for you on the screen. The next chapter's already calling.